Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes. Today we'll be diving into an insightful discussion on the deadly New Orleans attack. US President Joe Biden said that a remote detonator for unused explosives was found in the truck driven by the suspect of the New Orleans attack. It was carried out on New Year's Day, killing 15 people. Biden also said that the attacker had planted explosives in two nearby locations in the French Quarter a few hours before the attack. Biden also said that he was briefed about the incident by the FBI. Their bomb technicians found two functional IEDs in coolers in the area. The attacker, identified as Shamsud-Din Jabbar, is seen placing the devices in surveillance video footage. Both devices were rendered safe and two other items were determined not to be IEDs, although the FBI initially thought Jabbar may have had help carrying out the attack. The Bureau now believes no one else was involved. The FBI added that there is no definitive link between the attack in New Orleans and the Tesla Cybertruck explosion outside a Trump hotel in Las Vegas. In this debate, we are joined by four guests. We have Raymond Vickery, the former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, live from Washington. We have Adrian Calamel, terrorism scholar and fellow at the Arabian Peninsula Institute, also joining us from Washington. Irina Tsukerman, who is a human rights and national security lawyer, editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider from New York. And we also have Dr. Monica Verma, who is a foreign affairs expert. Adrian, I'd like to come to you first. And we're looking at an attack that we now know could have been a lot worse, considering there were IEDs that were planted and there were also bomb-making facilities and items that were found in the suspect's house. Is there a feeling in America this morning that this really could have been much more catastrophic and that the disaster facing New Orleans could have been a lot worse?
Great to join you, Joshua. Great question. Yes, the feeling is that this could have been worse, but there's also a feeling that is this the beginning of what's to come? We know that Al-Qaeda has a homeland plot, and that homeland plot involves ISIS as well. So the question is, now this individual seems to have been operating alone, but when we see one of these incidents, is this going to be the start in an uptick to these type of what I would call Fedayeen attacks?
Raymond Vickery, looking at the last ISIS attack that was in the US, it was in 2017. Adrian's there just spoken about radicalisation and a plot from Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Do you think it's going to be 8 years again, or do you think that this might start a sort of domino effect of further attacks in the US?
Well, Joshua, thanks for having me. I think that there is a very great concern that this may kick off other attacks, particularly here in Washington. You know, we have the state funeral of former President Jimmy Carter coming up. We've got the inauguration. So the security institutions are very much on edge as to how to protect this and make it safe. That having been said, it looks like if you take New Orleans, that people are resilient and moving ahead. The American football game, Sugar Bowl, went on last night with about 100,000 people present without a hitch. And there seems to be a damping down of the kinds of conspiracy theories that particularly former President Trump, President-elect Trump, is trying to push forward. The narrative, of course, that he's trying to push forward, that this is connected to border security and rampant crime. Of course, neither of those are true because this was an American citizen who perpetrated this attack in New Orleans, born in this country, a veteran of armed forces, did not come across the border, and overall crime is down. But this is grist for the mill, and exactly how it'll play out domestically is yet to be seen in view of the very attenuated political situation we have in the United States.
Irina Zuckerman, looking at what the FBI and local police departments can do to stop this sort of attack. We've seen a car, which is an everyday object, vital for a lot of people in their day-to-day lives, being used as a weapon. What do you think can be done to stop this sort of attack in future in the US?
Thank you so much for your questions, and Happy New Year to the panel and to the audience. There's a couple of things. First, there are clear red flags that have been missed, at least in the case of the New Orleans attacker Jabbar. He's had a history of violent extremist rhetoric, and the mosque he attended is reported to have extremist affiliation. So these issues need to be investigated, and social media, particularly of people with U.S. government links and connections, such as the military, needs to be monitored much more closely for such obvious signs. On the other hand, in general, ideology and extremism are playing an increasing role. This is something to be watchful for. This is something to be that needs to be understood much more deeply. And individuals such as Jabbar can also be used by state actors who hide behind the role of these non-state actor sympathies to push more advanced and coordinated attacks. We don't yet know for sure whether there is a connection with the attack in Las Vegas, but there are many questions about both attacks, the timing, the fact that both individuals have military backgrounds, both have been stationed at the same base, and both have rented vehicles from the same company on the same day. All of these things point to particular social vulnerabilities. There is a question whether the military is being targeted for radicalization by state or non-state actors. There's a question about resilience, whether particular members of the military or society are particularly vulnerable to approaches by foreign malign influences of various sorts, and whether there is perhaps an effort to suppress particular streams of investigation once such attacks occur, whether there's an effort to stifle discussion about the nature of radicalization and the nature of violent extremism, including in particular jihadist groups or state actors that meddle in U.S. politics through violence and through perhaps preventing such attacks. All of these questions require full commitment from security organizations, and that is difficult to do if those organizations are themselves penetrated by apologists of particular ideological streams, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, which is ultimately the motherhood of the ideological influence on ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Dr. Monica Verma, I want to look specifically at the radicalisation of people. We're seeing, of course, a lot more far-right movements, not just extremism related to Islam, but far-right across the world is gaining support because people are struggling with the cost of living. We're in a post-COVID life where things are different to how they were before. But in terms of spotting people that might be vulnerable and also spotting people who might be acting to try and radicalise these people, what else can be done, and how can those sort of channels be blocked before we get into a situation where a terrorist attack like this is carried out?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your question and thank you for having me. I think there needs to be a line that needs to be drawn between people who are facing such lifestyle problems, like you just have pointed out. Cost of living is rising, inflation is everywhere, and in fact I am from India and we are also struggling with certain problems. But that does not make one a terrorist. So we need to understand there's a difference between having a difficult life and someone getting radicalized, having those kinds of views and trying to kill their fellow human beings. Certain ideologies, like the previous panelists also very well pointed out, that certain ideologies in the world have been shaped in a manner, or probably they have certain content that makes people who read them or people who follow those ideologies to become more extremist, to become more violent. pointing that, hey, this ideology may create a problem tomorrow. Certain people, there's become a tendency, there's become a trend that those people are shut up. In fact, I'll give you a very good example. I'm from India and we face a lot of troubles when it comes to the Khalistan issue. We have seen how, Khalistani terrorists have literally, led to so many violent incidents in India. Our one prime minister was killed because of this. And in Canada also, a very, very brutal, bombing took place of an airplane. And then we also look at how, the Western world today, and a very, very significant section is out there to protect them under the flag of freedom of speech. And, our government consistently, keeps on telling them that, no, this is not done, you shouldn't be doing this, because you're literally playing with fire. These are people who do not believe in the religion, but these are people who basically believe in extremism. And so, please do draw that line, please do have some degree of caution. And that is where, we as civilized societies have literally lost the plot. When it comes to Al-Qaeda, or it comes to ISIS, or it comes to the Khalistani challenge, one thing which is common to them all is that they are part political, as well as, they draw their legitimacy or sort of organic support from certain religious ideologies. So what we need to do is we need to separate people who are civilized, we need to separate people who follow these ideologies, who basically follow the religion for the values, from people who would, have this tendency to pick up a gun, or maybe, hire a car and just ram into fellow human beings. So we need to do that, and to do this, we need to stop shaming ourselves by, labeling ourselves as far right, or maybe someone who's racist, or someone who is xenophobic. I think all this needs to stop, because ultimately national security is something which is very holy. And so in order to make sure that nation states remain as powerful as they have been in the last few centuries, as formidably supreme as they have been in the last few centuries, we need to make sure that this apparatus is now put to task, and that good old surveillance state, which is keeping a tab on elements who may create a problem later, are actually taken to task. So I think there's a great work out there for all of us. And in fact, looking at the way things have turned out for the people in the United States, my condolences with them, and I feel so bad looking at the visuals and so many terror attacks taking place in a single 2-3 span of days. So I think this is something that really needs to be taken very seriously, because once this genie is out of the bottle, then it will not spare other countries. It's sure to spread, because ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they operate like this. So they become a global brand, and we need to be very, very cautious of them.
Adrian Calamel, bringing it back to New Orleans, the families and friends of loved ones who lost their lives in this attack are asking questions and asking how this happened. Do you think that any organisation will come out and take ownership, or at least admit that there was mistakes that were made, and how do you think that can be moved on from, and how do you think certain parameters can be put in place to avoid this sort of attack?
Great question again. I don't know. There's going to be people that are accountable for this. I know there's already problems with with what's going on in New Orleans with the police department, as well as the mayor, I believe. One of the things that should be done, that needed to be done, and I had heard that these instruments were these hydraulic barriers that block off streets that would prevent a car from going down, were actually being repaired during this time. So they weren't available. If you're going to have open walking thoroughfares like this, you need to have barriers in place. Inspire magazine, Al-Qaeda's magazine, back in 2010, second edition, they put an SUV right on the front page and say, you don't need a bomb, you don't need a gun, just take your car and ram it into people. So it's just to create maximum casualties. So there are a number of things that could have been done. New Orleans, if you've ever been there, I don't want to say it's lawless, but it's a lot more open. It's a lot more free. There's open container where you can drink alcohol on the street, walking around, and there's generally not a fear of this type of thing. And unfortunately, it's now hit New Orleans. So things need to happen. The FBI came out right away and said this wasn't a terror incident. The first person that spoke. I don't know how they can do this. We've got some serious problems with our FBI and their national security counterterrorism team that look at these type of things. There needs to be accountability with this. There still hasn't been accountability with 2 Trump assassination attempts. We keep on seeing these things get pushed under the rug with no transparency. So transparency comes first. If you can't figure out what the problem is, how are you ever going to fix it?
Raymond Vickery, we have spoken about this previously, but for our audience members who weren't there for that discussion, we've brought this back to the political impact that it could have, and not taking away from the loss of life and the struggles that New Orleans are currently going through, but looking forward to the way that this could be used as a potential political tool for an incoming Trump administration. He was very quick, as you mentioned, to bring it back to immigration, bring it back to crime. But do you think that the people of America and the Trump supporters specifically could use this potentially as a catalyst moving forward to point the finger at certain demographics in America?
Well, there's no question that they're trying to do everything they can to accomplish that. The kinds of posts which have been made not only by the president-elect, but by his camp, the people who are speaking for him, says yes, that's the intention. I think that, Joshua, democracies have yet to come to grips with an effective approach to radical Islamic terrorism. But that doesn't mean you throw democracy out the window. It doesn't mean that you throw the rule of law out the window. And it certainly doesn't mean that you try to convert institutions like the Federal Bureau of Investigation not into crime fighting, but into retribution and trying to get back at your political enemies. So this is the grave danger in the United States. I think that we're at a point where constitutional crisis is going to come up. There will be a confrontation between the administration and the judicial system as to how indeed rights are protected, while at the same time you address legitimate security fears. It does not help, of course, to have these kinds of statements put out by the Trump camp, but that is the way in which they got to where they are. And this and anything else like this that comes up will simply be grist for the mill. It's up to great democracies like India and the United States not to just veer in the direction of how much security can we have, but how can we preserve democratic values at the same time as we were providing for the safety of citizens.
Irina, I want to come back to you and follow on from Raymond Vickery's question. Looking at some of the language that has been used, not just in speeches and during the campaign, but also across social media from Trump and his key allies, there seems to be a further extremeness to the words. War's been a word that's been thrown around by someone like Elon Musk. Do you think the extreme language, coupled with these extreme actions that we've seen and extremist actions, are leading America down a certain path? And what could that look like over the next 4 years?
I don't think anyone can force somebody else to become an extremist just by themselves using extremist language. However, those who are already inclined to be extremist, when they see consistent rhetoric of that sort from their political leadership, they find that sort of language and that sort of mindset more permissible, and they're more open to embrace it, and they feel more free to act on their ideas. Not because Elon Musk can convert a reasonable person into an extremist, but because people who are already in a bubble, who are already predisposed to echo chamber mentality and to a sort of extreme reactions, and to not stopping to think about the implications of such mentality, they tend to be reinvigorated and to find inspiration from top-down rhetoric of that sort. That alone, however, cannot account for social polarization, for the growth of extremist bubbles. There are certainly many actors involved. When government or government-affiliated people embrace conspiracy theories, that is certainly not helpful. it certainly gives those conspiracy theories and aggression and ideas, it gives them legitimacy at the top level. But once again, we live in a democracy. We don't have to listen to government officials or their or any business people saying foolish or aggressive things. We don't have to. Certainly, we don't have to follow that example. What is much more concerning is the lack of expertise among some of the government officials in both the Biden administration and now the new Trump administration, who don't seem to have a deep understanding of ideological and other threats we are facing. We seem to have, there's a lot of emphasis in the Biden administration that was placed on academic level sympathies and very idealistic and high-minded approach to foreign policy. Trump is relying, on the other hand, more on loyalists and people with business background or media background who are not necessarily do not necessarily have a thorough understanding of terrorism, security, highly specific ideological groups and movements. And that is a major weakness that can be exploited by rogue actors and by anyone seeking to deceive, mislead, or manipulate both the government and the public opinion.
Dr. Verma, in terms of coverage of the Syrian uprising, we have been speaking about the potential rise of ISIS. Do you think this is just circumstance, or do you think this is a result of the uncertainty in regions within the Middle East where ISIS and Islamist extremism is, of course, more popular and has been a hotbed in the past? Or do you think that this is just coincidence and more of an isolated incident?
Well, my opinion would, actually go on both sides. There definitely is a coincidence to this, but media coverage does play a very important role in, how these organizations, particularly if we look at the last 25 years, every single Islamic terrorist organization has benefited a lot from the kind of frame of references that have been used in media. And I say this because I've also been a former journalist, and in my own work I've observed that how a certain way of media portraying these terrorists plays a very important role. For instance, I would like to again give you a very specific example. In India, in Kashmir, there's a tendency to often refer to the militants as militants and not terrorists. So someone who's referring to them as militants would be someone who would also have sympathy for them. And then we have to tell the media very cautiously that please do not use the word militant, because that suggests that what they cause, the entire violence that they are unleashing, it's basically legitimate. So these are the kind of changes that media needs to do. This is the kind of introspection that needs to go on. Another thing that I would like to point out here is that in the last 2 days, if you look at the coverage of this particular person who's done the ramming of the cars in New Orleans, this person has been kind of covered in a very, very sympathetic light. Like I literally come across pieces telling about his family life, what did he like to have for lunch, and his hobbies and all. I don't understand this, and I'm not a counter-terrorism expert or scholar, but I have pointed this out so many times that when you kind of give some sort of dignity to someone who's killed his fellow human beings, that kind of encourages others also to follow suit. So I don't understand why media has this. It may help you grab more TRP, it may help you be more widely read, but it does not help the cause, because ultimately anyone who's speaking violence against other people is someone who needs to be condemned in the highest possible manner by a civilized society. So I think media needs to be very, very careful in choosing these frame of references.
Dr. Monica Verma, thank you for joining us. Also, thank you to our other guests, Raymond Vickery, Adrian Calamel, and finally, thank you, Irina Tuckerman. That is all for the debate today. We will continue to bring you all of the updates from New Orleans, across North America and the rest of the world.